Over the last 150 years, approximately 1,500 people have been hanged in the United Kingdom. Many of those desperately protested their innocence.
Could some of these long-standing convictions have been a miscarriage of justice?
There's a question mark over when precisely Frederick Morton was shot.
Barristers Sasha Wass and Jeremy Dean have been investigating these life-changing cases.
He cut off her head, dismembered her, and buried her in a place where he hoped she would never be found.
Representing living relatives, desperate to clear their family name.
The more you read about it, he could have been innocent.
With the help of modern-day experts,
she's been assaulted with a weapon, and there's been more than one blow.
they reassess the evidence.
We have a blood-stained knife. I simply don't understand the logic.
Before submitting their findings to a Crown Court judge.
Your Honour ought to declare the conviction for murder to be unsafe.
Now, as we reunite the barristers and the family members for the first time.
Hello, Gordon.
Hi.
We'll be finding out exactly what happened next.
They were told by the coroner that they had to find him guilty.
Yes.
Was justice served?
It's perfectly conceivable that Judge Radford got it wrong.
And are the unexplained cases finally closed? Today, the barristers are revisiting the case file on a Yorkshire farm murder in 1933. Following a car fire, a man's charred remains are discovered inside. But when the post-mortem reveals he in fact died from a gunshot, what follows is a sordid tale of affairs, vengeance and betrayal, resulting in the hanging of one man, Ernest Brown.
Sasha, as regards the case of Ernest Brown, a number of significant questions remain troubling. It's also uncertain when precisely Frederick Morton was shot and whether, in fact, Ernest Brown was present at that time.
Ernest Brown had the motive. He thoroughly disliked Frederick Morton. He had the means, he had access to a shotgun, and he certainly had the opportunity to be in the area at the time of the killing. So I see this as a compelling case against him for murder.
Well, you and I are going to have to differ. I don't see Ernest Brown's case as being anything like as open and shut as you appear to.
Later, Jeremy and Sasha will meet up with Ernest Brown's relative Claire to find out if a mysterious lead could help her quest for justice. But first, a look at this dramatic case. At 3 a.m. on a cold September morning in 1933, a mother, her infant and nanny ran out of their farmhouse to find the garage ablaze. Terrified and panicked, they sought refuge in a nearby hedge. Later that morning, the police found a burnt-out car in the shell of the garage, and inside, with the charred remains of 30-year-old farm owner Frederick Morton. A post-mortem revealed he had been shot. Suspicion soon fell on 35-year-old farmhand Ernest Brown. He was accused of confronting Morton, shooting him with a shotgun, and moving the car into the garage before setting it on fire. Despite vehement denials, Brown was convicted, and on the 6th of February 1934, at Leeds Armley Jail, Ernest Brown was hanged. Now, 86 years on, Ernest Brown's relatives, Claire and her son Archie, are determined to unearth the truth of what happened on the farm that fateful night.
My father was born in 1931. This happened in, I think, 1933, and he was hanged in 1934. So when my father was 2 or 3, you know, his mother's cousin was being hanged for murder.
The case against Brown relied on circumstantial evidence and damning witness testimony. But was it a miscarriage of justice? Claire and Archie have travelled to London to meet Sasha and Jeremy.
So tell me, when did you, Claire, first learn about this case?
When I was a little girl, my father said to me, Claire, do you know we've got a murderer in the family?
Is there anything that troubles you about the conviction?
So the murder happened in September. He was hanged by February.
I know.
After a month delay.
Well, that was quite slow at the going rate.
Was it really?
At that time, yeah.
So what chance then did people really have to gather evidence?
Probably
properly?
none.
I'm a barrister who prosecutes and defends. Just because I'm looking at it from the point of view of the prosecution does not mean that I want to uphold this conviction.
My principal objective, obviously, is to attack the conviction if it's possible to do that.
Ernest Brown was born into a working-class family in Huddersfield in 1898. And like many of his generation, served in the First World War, where he worked with horses in the Royal Artillery. As a young man, Brown had run-ins with the police, facing charges of being drunk and disorderly and assault. By the time of the murder, Ernest Brown had worked as a horse groom on cattle dealer Frederick Morton's farm for 5 years. The two men had known each other since childhood. But only months prior to the fatal night, Brown had abruptly left Morton's farm, returning days later, but this time as an odd job man. At trial, the prosecution argued this demotion caused Brown to resent his employer. But was Ernest Brown capable of murder? Sasha and Jeremy are starting their investigation by examining the key facts of that fateful evening.
So, Jeremy, there were only 3 adults and 1 child in the house. So there was Ernest Brown himself, Frederick Morton's wife, Dorothy, her baby daughter, and their nanny called Anne Houseman. At about 9:30, both women were together in the kitchen and they heard the sound of gunshot. Brown returned carrying a shotgun, and he said that he had been shooting rats. According to Anne Houseman, Brown was behaving strangely in an erratic manner, and the women were actually fearful of him. The women eventually retired to bed, and then at 3 o'clock in the morning, they were woken up to find that the garage and the barn was ablaze. Police attended, and it wasn't until 9 o'clock the following morning, when the fire had died down, that they went into the garage. They saw Frederick Morton's body in the motor car, but most importantly, they found a gunshot wound to his stomach, which experts at the time estimated was discharged at point-blank range. So, Jeremy, on the face of it, this looks like quite a strong case.
Well, Sasha, I want to get behind the story here, look at the timeline, look at the multiple accounts of witnesses in the context of this case.
OK.
Claire and Archie want to find out more about how the night of the murder unfolded. They've come to the scene of the crime with Claire's brother Dan, who has researched the case.
Everything's happened in the farm over there.
Just a few yards away over there.
Not far at all.
No.
According to the prosecution, Ernest Brown arrived back at the farm at 8:30 p.m. and immediately got into a heated argument with the farm owner's wife, Dorothy Morton.
At the point in time, Brown takes hold of Dorothy, takes hold of her by her shoulders. He threw her down and banged her head on the floor.
Dorothy then retreated into the farmhouse kitchen, where she stayed with the nanny, Anne Houseman. At 9:30 p.m., the two women heard a shotgun being fired. Was this the assassination of Frederick Morton?
Brown took the gun apart and started cleaning it. He then put the gun into its leather case and put it into the kitchen cupboard, where it's usually kept.
At 11:30 p.m., both the women heard a car being moved with its engine off.
Several minutes later, Brown entered the kitchen and said, "The boss has been in and gone out again." Dorothy and Anne did not hear the car leaving. Brown sat down at the kitchen table and stayed there until after midnight.
The prosecution claimed at some point during the course of the evening, Ernest Brown shot Frederick Morton and later set fire to the garage. Was he attempting to destroy evidence or give the illusion of an accident?
Later on that night, about 3 o'clock, Dorothy and Anne hear a crackling noise. They look out as if they see flames coming out from top of the garage. They telephone the police and fire brigade, but unable to get any response.
Dorothy, Anne, and the baby escaped into the fields, leaving the inferno behind them.
Something that struck my mind is Let's say Ernest has just committed a murder by shooting someone with a shotgun. Would you just start cleaning the murder weapon right in front of two witnesses? So it seems to me that there's something else going on, that either that isn't the murder weapon or the other two already knew about it and he doesn't feel the need to hide it from them.
A key witness called Francis Carwood placed Frederick Morton at a local pub between 8:15 and 8:45 p.m. Dorothy Morton and Ann Houseman corroborated that Ernest Brown returned to the farm at 8:30 p.m. The prosecution relied upon Brown being at the farm before Morton in order to kill him. But Jeremy has uncovered some key evidence that suggests Mr. Morton may have arrived home before Ernest Brown.
Maria Jackson has Frederick Morton leaving the Old George Hotel, Garforth Bridge, by 7 p.m. It's only a 4-mile drive from the Old George to the Boot and Shoe. There's no way, based on Maria Jackson's evidence, that Frederick Morton would have been at the Boot and Shoe as late as 8:15 to 8:45. He would have been there much earlier and then home at Morton's farm by no later than maybe 8 p.m. It's clear on the face of it that Francis Carwood's timings are out. And if so, the spectre of someone other than Ernest Brown.
Shotgun. Now, tell us about the hammerless ejector, what that means.
May I?
Of course.
Ejector means that when you discharge the gun and you open the breech, the fired barrel will eject the spent cartridge case. So if one brings it to the shoulder, fire the right barrel, click, bang. Opening the gun will now eject that cartridge.
Oh.
Like so.
Have you had an opportunity of reading Robert Churchill's evidence from the trial? He was the firearms expert.
Yes, indeed I have. He came to the conclusion that the recovered cartridge case had been discharged in the recovered gun.
And how is it possible to tell that?
What Churchill would have done is to look at microscopic marks on the primer of the cartridge case.
Right. So can I just be clear? Was it as a result of the firing pin imprint on the primer that caused Mr. Churchill to conclude that the gun in question had fired the shotgun cartridge?
That is correct.
Right. Thank you very much.
We know that Police Constable Lamb searched the farm and found an empty cartridge case 27 yards from the garage. Can it be said definitively that the Waddingham shot that killed Frederick Morton came from the cartridge case recovered by P.C. Lamb?
One cannot say definitively that it did.
So what we do know is that was of exactly the same caliber and type of shotgun cartridge. The wadding was found in the abdomen of the deceased.
Yes, there is a chain, potentially, of connections all the way from the gun to the recovered cartridge to the wadding and pellets found in the deceased.
Right. Thank you very much.
As the police investigation gathered pace, a remarkable discovery was made. For 4 years prior to the murder, without the knowledge of Mr. Morton, Ernest Brown had been having an affair with the farmer's wife, Dorothy. Claire and Archie want to explore this potentially game-changing toxic tryst, so they're meeting social historian Dr. Laura King.
Laura, we've found out so far that Ernest Brown was working as a groom. Is his position, do you think that was quite a secure one by then?
Well, it seems in this case it was. He'd been working there for some years. He was the longest-standing employee of Frederick Morton.
Yeah.
And it seems he was trusted for his expertise with horses.
I guess him being trusted with various jobs around the farm means he's going to be spending a lot of time with Mrs. Morton on the farm.
That seems to be what's happened, yeah. And this affair, we think, seems to have started and progressed over some years in the late 20s and early 30s.
Yeah.
The affair seems to have been the absolute hub of the case. It seems to have played an absolutely central part in understanding whether Ernest Brown was guilty. Hardly anyone at the time would have defended adultery and having an affair. But at the same time, it happens all the time.
Yes.
So there's that tension, really, between the fact that it's very, very common, but also it's very scandalous.
Ernest Brown's trial began on the 11th of December 1933. that Dorothy Morton was a key witness. She admitted to the affair, but claimed for the past 3 years she'd been an unwilling participant, painting Brown as an abusive and intimidating character, accusations which he denied. Could the clandestine love triangle have fueled the deadly sequence of events?
When Dorothy gave evidence, she said matters had turned sour as far as she was concerned. Her feelings had cooled. She was no longer as passionate about Ernest Brown as he was about her. So they put that emotional background very much in the forefront to present the jury with a motive as to why Ernest Brown would want to kill Dorothy's husband.
This is not a case where there was a positive, ongoing relationship between Ernest Brown and Dorothy Morton, which would have induced Ernest Brown to want to get rid of Frederick Morton.
Ernest Brown's trial lasted 4 days, but the prosecution never established what time Brown supposedly shot Morton. But nevertheless, Brown was found guilty. The day before he was hanged, he wrote to Florence Morton, outlining an alternative course of events. Sasha and Jeremy are examining the letter's contents.
So in this letter, Ernest Brown is clearly outlining how it was Dorothy Morton who admitted to him that she was the one who had shot and killed Frederick Morton.
Well, Jeremy, we've got to be quite cautious about people changing their account at the last minute, because Ernest Brown may well have believed that it was in the governor's gift to organise a stay of his execution. The other thing that immediately springs to my mind is this. If, during the course of the trial, Ernest Brown was protecting Dorothy and therefore blamed himself or put himself in a position where he was going to receive the blame, we must bear in mind that during the trial, Dorothy gave extremely unfortunate and damaging evidence against Ernest, which was completely unnecessary. She told the jury that he was violent, he'd tried to strangle her, he was abusive. All of that would have prejudiced Ernest's trial quite a lot. If Ernest knew that Dorothy had actually committed the murder, he would have had ample evidence with which to attack her as part of the cross-examination in the case, and he didn't do that.
You make a decent point. However, it's one thing to dispute allegations of violence, another to accuse the woman of having committed murder knowing that she'd hang for it if she was convicted.
With the judgment imminent, Jeremy is concerned that there may have been errors at a crucial point in the trial.
It's very important in a case like this to see how the judge dealt with the summing up in order to ensure that there was a fair trial, because this is just the kind of case where without a fair trial, there could be a miscarriage of justice instead, and the summing up will help me to determine into which category this case falls.
Following his execution, Ernest Brown was buried at Armley Jail, Leeds. And in 1990, his remains were reinterred to New Wortley Cemetery.
We've gone from a position of really not knowing this existed,
Yes.
to finding out some bare minimum facts, and probably us both thinking
It was damning, wasn't it,
He did it.
initially?
Yeah, and then there's a likelihood that he was innocent.
There's a big chance it was innocent. We're probably the first people in the family to have come to this spot and seen this.
Yeah.
Sasha and Jeremy have completed their investigation and now must make their submissions to Judge David Radford, an experienced senior Crown Court judge.
The difficulty that Ernest Brown had was the evidence of Mrs. Morton and the evidence of the nanny, both of whom connected him with a loaded shotgun at the significant time.
I'm going to argue that Ernest Brown's conviction is unsafe. I've also identified some significant problems in the summing up.
I'm just hoping that Jeremy has managed to dig something up and find something that I just don't know about.
Are you nervous about the outcome?
It's anticipation, but not nervous anticipation. I'm just really intrigued to see what you guys come up with.
There's one particular legal point that I think is of particular interest, but we're going to see the judge very soon.
So if you follow me.
Sasha and Jeremy must now present their arguments to Judge David Radford. With over 14 years as the senior judge to the largest Crown Court in England and Wales, he's tried some of the country's highest-profile murder cases.
We are here today for me to consider the safety of the conviction for murder of Ernest Brown. Mr. Dean.
There is no forensic link between Ernest Brown and the killing of Frederick Morton. Can I bring to Your Honour's attention the terms of a letter written by Ernest Brown on the 5th of February 1934 to Frederick Morton's sister, and it reads as follows. On my arrival, I saw Mrs. Morton, asked her where the boss was, meaning Fred. She then said, I have shot Fred with the gun. And so this is a letter written by Mr. Brown, which I submit raises additional concerns that Dorothy Morton was indeed truly culpable for Mr. Morton's death, and that her culpability was not properly explored in the course of Mr. Brown's trial. In the course of the trial judge's summing up, the judge failed to deal properly or adequately with the burden and standard of proof. What the judge has done is first to say the requirement is proof to the jury's reasonable satisfaction, and secondly, that they needed to have substantial doubt in order to acquit. Both were wrong, both were misdirections, both were liable to lead to an unjust verdict, both render Mr. Brown's conviction unsafe.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Dean. Ms. Wass, do you wish to develop your submissions?
This was a case of deliberate murder. May I address Your Honour on the letter written by Ernest Brown before he was hanged? Ernest Brown, for the first time, blamed Dorothy Morton for the death of her husband. Dorothy Morton made a fair and square attack on the character of Ernest Brown at trial, which she would never have done had she had something to hide, and knowing that he had the material with which to blame her. There's no doubt that the judge addressed the burden of proof entirely properly.
Yes.
The wording used, reasonable satisfaction, substantial doubt, deviates from the model direction, but the error does not render this conviction unsafe because it was based on the most overwhelming evidence.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Wass. I shall review your oral submissions and in due course let you know my view of this matter.
Thank you.
Did Ernest Brown shoot his employer, Frederick Morton? Or was there, in fact, an entirely different person responsible? Judge Radford is now ready with his verdict.
There can be no doubt that the deceased Frederick Morton was deliberately shot and murdered. Mr. Dean is right that there is no clear scientific evidence which can be relied on specifically against Mr. Brown. However, a letter was written by Mr. Brown to the sister of the deceased. I find what he said in the letter to be utterly belated, never ventilated at the trial, and cannot properly undermine the verdict. As to the standard of proof, that any doubt would have to have been a reasonable doubt. A substantial doubt would, of course, be a reasonable doubt. That being my conclusion, this is not a case where, in my view, there has been an unsafe verdict. I shall rise.
Having reviewed the facts of the case, will Jeremy and Sasha have conflicting views of the judge's verdict?
Sasha, summing up in a murder trial is a really important phase of the trial. And despite the quality of the summing up in this case, Judge Radford proceeded to find against Ernest Brown.
He looked at all of the evidence and came to the conclusion that this was a very strong circumstantial case, and I have to say, I agree with him.
Well, Claire certainly wouldn't agree with you. It'd be interesting to see how she feels now and what developments there might have been.
Claire has travelled to London to meet the barristers. She has information that could shed new light on the case.
I'm really looking forward to meeting Sasha and Jeremy again. But I would just like to put a few questions to Sasha and Jeremy, and I hope that they might say, actually, yes, Claire, maybe there are some doubts.
Claire, lovely to see you again.
Hi again, Sasha.
Hello, Claire.
Hi, Jeremy.
How are you?
I'm very
Have
well.
a
How are you?
seat.
Good, thanks.
Now, Judge Radford's verdict was not what you wanted to hear. How do you feel about it now, having reflected on it?
To be honest, on the day, listening to what was put to Judge Radford, I would have found it a safe conviction.
Right. Now, you say that as if you've come to a different conclusion since then.
You know, you go home and you have time to reflect, don't you? And then I got a message that there was a lady and she lived in the village. She remembers Ernest and she would like to talk to me.
Claire returned to Saxton, the scene of this explosive murder, to follow up on this mysterious lead.
So excited to go and hear what she has to say. I mean, apart from anything else, this is someone who remembers my relative.
Could a first-hand account from someone living in the village at the time put a new complexion on this case?
Hello, Bet.
Pleased to meet you.
So nice to meet you.
Claire arranged to meet 96-year-old Bet Pick at her farmhouse just a mile from the scene of the crime.
Mind if I sit here?
Yes, that's quite a...
Next to the fire. When Ernest Brown was living here, which was early 30s, you would have been about, what, nine?
Nine? 10, 9.
Yeah. It's just fantastic to meet someone from the village and to hear about what the village kind of thought of him.
He used to go for a drink to the ground. I used to pass him on the lane at dark and just pass the time of day, and that was it. He was very quiet and polite.
He wasn't thought of as a bully or...
Oh, no, nobody ever said anything wrong about it.
Do you mind me asking you what you remember about the incident, the fire?
We didn't know what had happened, you see. They just said there'd been a fire at Saxton Grange in the garage and Mr. Martin had died. In fact, we didn't know a lot about, Mr. Martin. Well, we only know he lived there and he worked in Leeds and travelled daily.
What did people say about him?
Only that he liked his drink.
Did he? Do you know anything, can you remember anything about what people in the village were saying?
Well, at first they thought it had been an accident, that he had gone home, driven home drunk and lit a cigarette and set himself on fire, fallen asleep. But then it came out that he'd been shot. We went to see it, but all there was a big black charred mess.
Do you remember seeing Dorothy?
Yes. But I only saw the horse and her on it go by. I didn't, never spoke to her.
Did people ever talk about what they thought about Dorothy?
She had an affair with Brown. She got him to do it because she wanted rid of her husband.
So people thought she wanted rid of her husband?
Yes.
Why?
Well, because he always coming home drunk.
So your feeling is that they sort of did it together?
Yes. She was as much to blame. That's what everybody was saying.
Yeah, and she got away with it?
And she got scot-free. She didn't even do a prison sentence.
If what you're saying is that she was more instrumental than I've thought before, then that does explain quite a few things to me.
I couldn't understand why he took all the blame and let her go scot-free.
Can you think of a reason?
Well, only that supposedly the child was Brown's and not Martin's.
Yeah.
He was thinking of the child and, you know...
Yes. He decided to sort of sacrifice himself.
He decided to die instead of telling the truth. But they had every sympathy for him when they got to know he had to hang for it. And they said she should have hung as well as Brown.
I can understand how that must have been a very exciting meeting for you, to meet somebody who actually had met Ernest.
Yes.
But this is a 9-year-old's perspective.
Well, and also what people were saying in the village. I accept what you're saying.
No, I'm just clarifying with
yes.
you that
well, this is a 9-year-old telling me this.
So we have a lot of tittle-tattle about a woman who it transpired had been having an affair with a man who was executed for the murder of that woman's husband. She was obviously not going to be a popular figure, Dorothy, in those circumstances.
She didn't say anything unpleasant about her. I think the impression I got...
The suggestion that she'd got away with murder is not a pleasant reputation to have, is it?
No, you're right.
Is there anything that you are able to present to us to say, right, this is new evidence, look at it again?
No, I think it's background.
All right.
I think what it is someone who's saying he was not thought of as the aggressive person that was painted in court.
Have you been able to build upon the information you received from Bet Pick?
Well, I did have a really interesting meeting with Diane Janes again in Huddersfield, and she believes that it's not a safe conviction.
Determined to explore the murder from a new perspective, Claire met up with case expert and crime writer Diane Janes.
Hi Claire, how lovely to see you again.
Really good to meet you again, Diane.
I don't know if you know where we are, but this is now a theatre, but it used to be the main Wesleyan Mission Hall for Huddersfield, and this is where Ernest used to worship as a boy.
On the day of Ernest's execution, 250 people gathered here to mourn his tragic end. Diane brought Claire to the modern-day site of the mission.
So, here we are in the modern chapel.
Yeah.
It's different. On the morning of Ernest's execution, and it's reported here in the newspapers, they sang hymns and said prayers. At the hour of execution, they held a silence. Wow. That's his own community, his own people. I've read about many murder cases, and I've never come across anything quite like this before. It's very clear that a lot of Ernest's own friends, family, the people who knew him, firmly believed that he was innocent.
Diane has further information for Claire that amounts to an alternative theory on the case. Shortly before his execution, Ernest wrote a letter to the victim's sister, Florence, revealing that it was Dorothy Morton who shot her husband. But does this version of events stack up?
Ernest's own story of what happened that night is much more sensible than the prosecution case. He says Frederick was already dead in the barn, that Dorothy had shot him. Ernest then discharges the remaining cartridge at 9:30 and puts the gun away. The prosecution case is that Frederick Morton returns at 11:30 at night, but Ernest then shoots him and sets the barn on fire at 3 o'clock.
Two witnesses in the case gave conflicting evidence regarding the timings that night.
The prosecution chose to accept the time given by Francis Corwood, who was the last witness to see Frederick Morton alive. But in court, Francis Corwood admitted that he'd had no way of knowing what time it was. It was a complete estimate. If they'd relied on the time of Annie Jackson, who was the penultimate witness, that actually would have placed Frederick back at the farm before Ernest and Anne Houseman. And Annie Jackson said she was sure of the time.
At trial, Dorothy Morton gave damning evidence against Ernest. On the night of the fire, she claimed to be terrified of him, escaping into the fields to take refuge. But Diane has evidence that contradicts this story. Could it prove that Dorothy lied in court?
Florence Morton, who, as you know, was Freddie's sister, she wrote to the Home Secretary January the 28th, 1933, and she says, "You may have noticed that I signed the petition for Brown's reprieve." And
hang on, Diane. So the victim's sister signed a petition for the reprieve.
She went to see him in prison and asked him to tell the truth about it. She didn't believe Dorothy's account. This is unique in my experience. So she also says that she goes there on the morning of the fire, and she says, you know, if he's been threatening Dorothy and subjecting her to this night of terror and all of this story, she said, why then did Dorothy state that Brown had been splendid in getting the horses out, etc.? She talked about how brave he was fighting the fire.
It's rubbish.
Exactly. That doesn't work either. No. As soon as the police arrive, you're going to say, this man's been threatening me, I'm terrified, I believe he's murdered my husband.
Yes.
You're not going to go around telling everyone he was a hero because he got all the horses out and helped fight the fire.
No.
That makes no sense at all. She only accuses Brown and starts telling these stories about Brown once the post-mortem has been done and the slug has been found in Frederick's body, once it becomes clear that somebody is going to be in the frame for murdering her husband. So clearly, from this letter, Florence does not believe that Ernest's the guilty party. She clearly believes that there is something going on with Dorothy.
Yeah. I don't believe you would do that if you weren't sure yourself. You wouldn't write to the Home Secretary, would you?
No.
On your scenario, Dorothy was the murderer. Dorothy, at trial, was the main prosecution witness against Ernest. He had all the ammunition,
I know,
to give to his lawyers to say, you cross-examine that woman, because
Well, you say that woman, that's the mother of his child.
Yes, your answer to that will be he didn't implicate her because he was protecting his child. But before he was executed, he decides to blame her, because that's what he did.
Yes.
So where is his loyalty to his child at that stage?
I think that he believed all the way along that he wasn't going to be found guilty because he wasn't even there and he didn't do it. And he had this blind faith in the British justice system that if you weren't there, how could you be found guilty? Only at the last minute did he decide to tell the truth.
During the course of our original investigation, we did look at Dorothy's role in some detail.
Yeah.
As far as Florence's involvement is concerned, and she knew that Dorothy, her dead brother's wife, had been having an affair during the course of her marriage. Florence would have had no love for Dorothy. So we have to take that on board.
She'd have had no love for the person who she had been found guilty of her brother's murder
She may have believed that Dorothy was implicated because she had seen Ernest Brown in prison, and Ernest Brown had sown the seed in Florence's mind.
No, no, because Florence went to him. Not that he didn't ask her to come to him. She initiated that. So I think she must have had that doubt already.
You have presented us some news which, on the face of it, hasn't presented me with anything which I consider remotely to be firm, new evidence. But I want to know what Jeremy thinks.
Well, what I would say is that the analysis you put forward sounds to me, you know, perfectly feasible. I'm more impressed with your theory than Sasha is, but I think it is of interest that people you've spoken to say that the picture that was painted of Ernest Brown was different to the Ernest Brown that they knew. That's important. Everything you have said gives me reason to think that there is a question mark against his guilt.
Diane Janes shared another bit of information with me. She showed me an article about what the inquest jury found.
You can see this is in the paper, January the 26th. Dramatic sequel to Saxton Grange murder, sensational attitude of the coroner's jury. In cases of this sort, the inquest is always held over until after the criminal proceedings have taken place. And after the trial was over, the inquest was reconvened, and the inquest jury, quite astonishingly, said no, they were not prepared to bring in a verdict of murder against Ernest Brown. They didn't feel that the evidence stacked up.
There's people there that clearly think there's grave doubt.
Yes.
But they were told by the coroner that they had to find him guilty?
Yes. The coroner explained to them that they had no alternative. Legally, they had to bring in a verdict which accorded with the result of the trial.
Yes.
So very, very reluctantly, they brought in that verdict. I've looked at an awful lot of cases around this era,
Yes.
and for me, this is a clear miscarriage of justice, and I've perhaps never felt quite so strongly about a case.
Your newspaper article, I think, is interesting. What I would like to know, and I don't know if you can tell me, is what evidence was put before the inquest jury. Was it the same evidence that was put before the assize jury which convicted Ernest Brown, or was it simply a formality of there has been a conviction, you must return a conviction that is consistent with it?
But let's just imagine that all that the inquest jury hears is a shortened form of the evidence and he's been found guilty. Under those circumstances, why would they challenge it?
We don't know is the answer. One of the things that is sacrosanct about the deliberations of juries is that they remain private forever.
But what we could maybe find out is what evidence they heard.
Absolutely, that's critical.
All I can do is to compliment you on the work that you've done, to say that I am influenced by the thesis you put forward, and you've simply consolidated my view that it's perfectly conceivable that Judge Radford got it wrong.
It's maybe a silly question, but is this case closed?
No, for me, there's still a lot to discover, and the case isn't closed.
It sounds, from everything you've said, that far from being closed, it's wide open. But it's been great seeing you again, and meeting you again, and listening to you again. So thank you so much for everything you've told us.
And we wish you the very best of luck. Thank you.
It was quite a relief to get those points off my chest. I've been doing a little bit of research and no one to talk to about it, and so to talk to the experts was great, actually. Sasha still needs convincing. Jeremy was perhaps more amenable to what I was saying. There's more work to do for me, so I don't think this can be the end now. I think I'm in too deep.